The federal government's push to allow thousands of extra international arrivals each week is still up in the air this morning, with not all states coming on board. Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack yesterday wrote to premiers asking them to take extra numbers in hotel quarantine to allow more stranded Australians to come home. New South Wales has agreed, but Western Australia's Premier has accused the Commonwealth of ambushing it with the request.
Meantime, New South Wales is preparing to announce that crowd sizes at sports events could soon be increased as it continues to keep a cap on new COVID-19 cases. While Melburnians are this morning living inside a ring of steel, facing $5,000 fines if they attempt to visit regional Victoria, where coronavirus restrictions eased at midnight. We'll get the latest on international borders shortly, but first, Zali Rismal is in Melbourne for us this morning. Chris Tester is in the beautiful city of Mildura. Starting with you, Zali, what is the so-called Ring of Steel and how is it being policed?
Well, the Ring of Steel is a hard border that was actually erected around metropolitan Melbourne back in July. Now, that's when we saw this surge in COVID-19 cases in metropolitan areas, and of course it's a reflection of the fact that there was a high concentration of cases in the city versus the country areas, and that's effectively when the state was divided in two, with regional Victoria operating under a different set of circumstances. Now currently we can see that regional Victoria has only 37 active cases, and that's compared to 948 in Melbourne, and the government certainly wants to keep it that way. The Premier has said multiple times that they will jealously guard those low numbers in regional areas. Of course, that allows the state to have this two-speed easing of restrictions, but it's also a reflection of the fact that there is less capacity out in regional areas to deal with any spike in COVID-19 cases, and particularly when it comes to ICU beds.
Indeed, and they're very keen to keep those numbers low, if not non-existent, in regional Victoria. Let's take it to Mildura now. Chris, good morning to you. Those restrictions were eased as of midnight last night for Mildura and other areas of regional Victoria. So what will people in the bush be able to do from today?
Yeah, good morning, Michael. I'm actually staring at the moment at a riverfront cafe here in Mildura, which is setting up its outdoor chairs and tables for the first time in many months. As of today, people in regional areas can go outside and have a coffee, have a sit-down coffee. They can only do so in groups of up to 10. You can also have visitors to your house for the first time in a long time. The caveat there, though, is they can only come from a nominated household, and they're capped at 5. You can have outdoor gatherings of up to 10 people, and there are other things as well, such as elective surgeries back on again for the first time in a couple of months. So as of today, regional Victoria is starting to open up again.
Which is great news. What's been the reaction so far?
Look, there's just a sense of relief, I must say. The other good news that people in communities like Mildura and Echuca and Albury-Wodonga have had overnight is that New South Wales has decided to ease its border restrictions. This was anticipated, although it hadn't been expressly announced, that once Victoria took another step towards reopening, New South Wales would ease its restrictions. It means people living in these border communities who have a border permit to enter New South Wales, they no longer need a particular reason to cross the border. They can do so just for the purposes of daily life, and that means important recreational activities that everyone has just been looking forward to up here, such as going out on the river and having a fish and getting on a houseboat. Those things are all options to us again, and I must say, Michael, every time there has been any changes around restrictions, one of the first questions that we just get bombarded with from local people up here is, can we go camping? Can we go out onto the water again? And as of today, those things are finally possible.
Wish you hadn't said that, Chris. I'm even more jealous of all of you up in Mildura and elsewhere in regional Victoria. Chris, Zali, thank you both. Meanwhile, the inquiry into Victoria's hotel quarantine program has heard the state's Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, was not consulted about the decision to use private security guards to secure the hotels. Professor Sutton says he didn't know private security was being used until after the outbreaks that sparked the state's second wave of infections. He says security guards were the wrong people to secure the hotels because the casualised and vulnerable workforce increase the risk of transmission.
We're returning now to the federal government's plan to increase arrivals from overseas. Our political reporter Stephanie Boris joins us now from Parliament House. Steph, so are more Australians going to be able to get back from overseas?
Well, Lisa, that's the plan at least. The federal government is very keen to lift the weekly cap. It sits at 4,000 people per week at the moment. The federal government wants to lift that to 6,000. But in order for that to happen, it does require the states and the federal government to work together. So the federal government has specifically asked New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia to take more people. And this will be discussed further when they all meet tomorrow via phone hookup for National Cabinet.
And Steph, why are some states reluctant to accept the additional Australians?
Well, there's a great deal of concern with these states. They don't want to become the next Victoria in terms of a hotel quarantine outbreak. So that's one element to it. New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia have said that they will consider lifting the cap as the federal government has asked, but that does only occur if the other states do the same thing and there's support from the federal government. When it comes to Western Australia, the Premier there, Mark McGowan, says he's angry that this hasn't been discussed directly with him. This announcement was made yesterday via the media. He says, of course, WA will consider it, but it really does depend on what the Commonwealth can offer.
We currently have 8 hotels with people returning to Western Australia. Our health advice is that is difficult. That's really at the extent of what we can manage at this point in time. But we're more than happy to have a conversation with the Commonwealth. If they want to provide extra resources, in particular ADF, we'll look at what else can be done. But it really is something the Commonwealth needs to lead.
Now, Lisa, logistics aside, all of these states do acknowledge the fact that we've got more than 27,000 Australians still overseas and we do need to get them home. The federal government's hoping maybe this cap of 6,000 per week can be introduced by the end of the month. However, some sad news for some Australians, the federal government saying that some won't be able to make it home by Christmas despite the increase, hopefully, in the cap.
Yeah, it's become a real issue. We've been hearing from people over the last month or so as well, and will continue to do so, no doubt. Even if they increase it, Steph, it's still going to take a while to get everyone back. Thank you for the details.
Finance News Now, here's Madeline.
Thanks very much, Michael. Now, we're talking mortgage deferrals this morning and loan deferrals because that special period of loan deferrals brought in for COVID is coming to an end. Now, of course, when COVID hit, the banks did bring in this loan deferment, letting people who had mortgages or small business loans who are in financial trouble because of the pandemic pause their repayments for up to 6 months. Now, as of July, 900,000 loans were deferred, worth $240 billion altogether. That's nearly 1 in 10 home loans and 17% of all small business loans. But with that deferment period now coming to an end, banks are starting to contact customers to talk about the next steps. So what are those options? Well, if you took one of those deferrals and you're able to start repayments, even part repayments, banks say you should, bearing in mind that the loans are still accruing interest. If you are still in financial trouble, the bank may be able to extend the deferral by up to 4 months, but this is not automatic. You need to talk to your bank to arrange this. Very important. Nerida Conisby, the Chief Economist of REA Group, joins me now from Sydney to talk more about it. So, Nerida, it is really important that people start talking to their banks if they can't start their repayments, because there are actually a range of options. What are they?
Yeah, look, there are a range of options, and I think you do need to realise, well, we all need to realise that we are in a very unusual recession. The banks are well capitalised. They are working with customers, very different to where we were in the early 90s and certainly different from the global financial crisis. So I think the first step is always go speak to your bank. There's lots of different options, whether it is an extension of the mortgage payment deferral, whether it is going on interest only, consolidating debt, extending terms. There's lots of things that they can do. The second thing is if you are still able to pay a loan, it does help to look to speak to a mortgage broker. There are some really competitive deals out there. You can get mortgage rates of under 3% now, so just make sure you are getting the lowest mortgage rate possible. And thirdly, the real problems that seem to be emerging at the moment aren't so much in the owner-occupier market, they are in the investor market. So if you are an investor and you can't get a tenant, look to reducing your rent, at least just for a short time period until the economy opens up again. And also if you do have a tenant, really continue to keep that dialogue with that tenant to make sure that you can receive a rent to pay back your loan.
Yeah, it is all about talking, and worryingly, 20% of mortgage holders contacted by banks so far, they're starting to make these calls to see what people want to do, haven't responded. And I think that the point really to drive home is it's actually not in the bank's interest to repossess your home. They don't want to do that. They want you to continue to service that loan. So pick up the phone if the bank calls.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it isn't in the bank's interest to have to go through a mortgagee sale. I mean, they do want people to pay off their loans fundamentally. So, I think it is go speak to your bank. I mean, the banks did offer automatic mortgage payment referrals, which is why we had so many. It was such a huge number in terms of the people that took up that offer. But yeah, go speak to your bank. The loan does need to be repaid at some stage. So the earlier you can sort out a repayment schedule, the better.
And Nerida, just finally, it is comforting for people to know that the bank has now extended the period to which your credit rating won't be affected if you actually have deferred the loan until next year. So that's good news.
Yeah, absolutely. It is good news. I mean, we have just come through a Financial Services Royal Commission. So, I think a lot of the bad behaviour of banks has been cleaned up, hopefully. So, as a result, they do seem to be working a lot with customers and really trying to help people through this time period.
Yeah. OK, Nerida, thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Michael and Lisa, this is one of the ways that we're sort of avoiding that fiscal cliff that people were particularly warning about. You can extend that deferral by 4 months, but communication is key. You need to speak to your bank.
Thank you, Madeline.